Hello, my friends, and welcome back to History for Thinkers, a show that brings history to life and makes it easy to understand. In this episode, we are going to be continuing the infamous Mein Kampf analysis series. Also, let me know what you guys think of the new little setup here. I think you guys get, the ability to see a little bit more of what's going on. Like the font is a little bit bigger, which is nice for reading things. And I think it just is a nicer way of doing things. But maybe that's just me. If you guys don't like it, I can go back to the way things were before. Just let me know. Let me know what you guys think. Just don't be too mean about it. Like, man, I'm seeing too much of this guy's face. He's ugly. If you say something like that, man, send a box of tissues, because I'm going to need them. Now, before we get into the show, I want to give a massive thank you to everybody over on Patreon for supporting the show and making everything possible. Thank you guys so much. It really means the world to me that you guys care about history as much as I do. Now, I want to give a massive personal thank you to Matthew Wyzurek for being the first and currently the only financer over on Patreon, which is the top tier. So in addition to getting bonus content, extra episodes, things like that, Matthew also gets his name on the big screen. If you're interested in joining Matthew and becoming a financer, you can get more information over on the Patreon page. A link will be in the description. And with that out of the way, let's get into the episode. And it is here, my friends, that we've come to a bit of a crossroads in Mein Kampf, where he actually kind of departs from the kind of things that you're used to him talking about, and he starts going on this whole, you could almost think of it like an anti-capitalist kind of rant here. Because he's talking about how capitalism and, generally capital, right, money, currency, should be owned and produced for the state in order to benefit the people, right? So the state is supposed to serve the people, and the state should use currency or capital, money, as a way to better economic activity and secure social rights of workers. I mean, he even says it right here, right? On the to safeguard the social rights of the workers. So it's just really interesting to see how, that is a very lefty position at the time, right? I don't think that was all that out there because of course they were living through the early days of the Industrial Revolution, and big business was not very nice to most people. They were pretty abusive. Thankfully we live in the days of labor laws and they can only abuse you so much now. But back then there was no limit. I mean, there was child labor. There were people working, ungodly amounts of hours a week, 100-hour weeks, crazy things like that. So it's just weird to see him talk about the social rights of workers. But really it does kind of tie back into his whole ideology of the state commanding capital. And that's a little bit different from the communist take on it, because they're a little bit more of, let's make sure everyone is good and, just completely screw the economy. Like, they are all about the safeguarding the social rights of the workers. So that would be the communist take on it. But Hitler actually does acknowledge that there needs to be a vital and independent system of national economy. So he does recognize this as important to a functioning state, especially one that wants to become a world power. So, fair enough, I think he actually recognizes the importance of both sides of the coin. You need a good economy. You need people to be able to make money, grow businesses, things like that, because that's just generally good for your country. But you also need to make sure that they don't run roughshod over everyone else. And balancing those interests, that is a game we're still playing to this very day. So it's interesting to see Hitler's take on it. And now I think we've come to a good part where we can kind of psychologically dissect what Hitler is saying here. Because we get to a point where he's talking about the difference between a political philosopher and a practical political leader. Now, we already know how he thought of himself. He was not someone that was concerned with ideas. He was not a philosopher. He was a practical political leader. And I think it's really important to make the distinction here because, one of the examples he uses as a political philosopher is actually religion. So he talks about these people that were the founders of religions and how they are more concerned with having, I think he says something like the eternal truth or a eternal truth. And, those are great and all, but, and they might make the world a better place, but they don't ever get actualized. He acknowledges here that, no matter how good your religion is, your ideas, they are never going to achieve 100% success. They are never going to be 100% validated. I mean, even if it's a really popular religion like Christianity, there's probably never going to be a day when 100% of the human population is a Christian or adheres to that religion. So he kind of acknowledges that, but how they're also doing a service to mankind, So that's that. Nice for them. But then he has this other group of people, the practical political leaders. These are the people that are influenced by the big ideas, the absolute truths that are laid out by the philosophers, but they're less concerned with them. Maybe they bring those ideas into real politics a little bit, but not a whole lot. And we can really see the influence of Bismarck. So right down here, Hitler says that, quote, "If such a politician resolutely avoids great ideas, his success will be all the easier to attain." And he gets that right from Bismarck. He spells it out right here. Now, that is, you can see, all right, here we can talk about Bismarck and Hitler and some of that. So Bismarck was a really great political leader. He was good at geopolitics. He knew how to make things happen. Now, he was not really one for ideology. He was someone that was a ruthless practitioner of realpolitik. So whenever he did things, he was just like, it was a chess game to Bismarck. There was no higher ideal. He was just trying to win. He just wanted to win the game. Because that's how he saw it. It was a big game, and he wanted to win, and in the end, you can argue that he did. Right? Now, Bismarck is different from Hitler in the sense that Hitler is also someone that plays the game to win, but he's also influenced by these grand ideas. Now, if those grand ideas had come from anywhere other than where he actually got them, right, maybe it wouldn't have been so bad. But because the grand ideas that Hitler was influenced by were what they were, it turned into a pretty nasty thing. And with that being said, Hitler definitely places himself into this category of the practical political leader. So whatever he does, right, he almost lays out his own justification here. Whatever I do, if and when I become a big politician one day, it is all in the name of winning the game, making things actually happen. Because otherwise, the great truths, the ideals of the world, they're just not practical. In fact, the less you are concerned with them, the more likely you are to be a successful politician. And you know what? I'm not a politician. I've never been one. I'll probably never be one. But from what I've heard throughout history and from different people talking about politics, this probably is true to an extent. If you are 100% ideologically bent on this or that, whether you're a radical, whether you're an idealist for the environment, whatever you are, it is going to be easier the less connected you are with those big, grand ideas. As good as they may be, or as terrible as they may be, in Hitler's case. And here we have come to an interesting point that Hitler has made, that a lot of other people have made this argument. All right, he's not the first person to have this idea. But I think it is worth exploring a little bit. So, concerning politics in general, Hitler writes, quote, "To pursue ideals which will still be of value and significance for the future is generally not a very profitable undertaking, and he who follows such a course is only very rarely understood by the mass of the people, who find beer and milk a more persuasive index of political values than far-sighted plans for the future, the realization of which can only take place later on, and the advantages of which can be reaped only by posterity. Very interesting little paragraph here. Now, what's fascinating about it is this is not a new argument, right? People have always been pointing out that when you have a democracy or a republic, a system where people can vote on politicians, whenever you have that system, the incentive of the politicians and the incentive of the people are kind of misaligned. The politician is only really concerned with staying in power. They are not really going to be someone that thinks long term about their impact, about the laws they pass, the kind of activities that they do. Generally, they're just about them. They want to stay in power. They want to be famous. They want to, command the whole country, right? This is what they are. This is what they do. And they do these little political fiascos where they control the mass of the people by giving them not long-term fixes. They don't fundamentally fix systems. This is why reformers are so important when you get them. But generally, there are people who they find beer and milk and they give them to the people, right? So short-term quick fixes that don't fundamentally address the underlying problem. Now, if we were going to try and make this relevant to the modern age in the United States, let's say, because I'm American, that's what I know. I don't know much outside of that. But here in the United States, one of the big problems we're facing is the student debt crisis, right? So there's the college industrial complex where the only way to rise up in social status, to make more money, to have a better life, to be a generally better person, you need to go to college. So all these people, myself included, have gone to college, and then they get there and they don't really get a whole lot out of it. They don't get a whole lot of marketable skills. They come out with a degree, a fancy piece of paper, but a lot of them don't actually end up getting to use it, at least in any meaningful way. Even if they do, sometimes it's, they find it's kind of disappointing. It's not what they really wanted. And then there's the whole career shift dilemma. Now, a really good idea would be to fundamentally address the problem of all this debt that people are taking on. Maybe change up the system, maybe have more internships available, maybe people that go to college, they work on job for, they work with companies, something like that. That would be a way to address the underlying fundamental issue. But instead, what people want to do is they want to forgive student loan debt and not change anything, which is a very, very bad idea. We can talk a lot about this whole topic, but generally, that is a short-term fix, right? That is the beer and milk that is not going to fix the problem that, the next generation of people, they're going to go through this very same system, and if you don't fix it, you don't change the broken system itself, then you're just going to be in the same problem the next generation. So not only is it very expensive for the taxpayer and whatnot, but it's just, you got to fix the system. You got to fix the system. And this is where the long-term thinking, right, the far-sighted plans for the future come in. Because politicians, they don't care about that. They want to get a quick win. You get a politician in the United States, they get out there and they forgive student loan debt. There are going to be a lot of people that are very much in favor of that. They're going to love that politician, right? I mean, personally, I would even benefit from that. So, I can even acknowledge that, generally it's not a good idea. I don't think it is. At least if you don't fix the underlying issue, right? You don't fix the system and then you forgive all this student loan debt. Not a good thing. But I would even find myself kind of torn. I would be like, oh, wow, I'm thousands of dollars less in debt than I otherwise would be, it would be really hard. So a lot of people would kind of gravitate toward that politician. Whereas a lot fewer people, or at least a much smaller number of people, would be really on board if a politician or the president, whatever, wanted to actually fix the college system itself. So bringing this back to Hitler, I think that he kind of applies this whole idea to kind of his criticism of the Weimar Republic, right? Generally where Germany started actually voting, and they had the Reichstag, and people actually had some say in how the country was going to be organized and the laws that got passed, which, it sounds really good when you live in a nice stable country, when things are going well. That is one thing. But all of a sudden, when you live in a country where the politicians are doing stupid things, right? Because I think probably the big thing that he was applying this to, or he got this idea of a short-term fix, was hyperinflation. So the government was just printing money, and that was the beer and milk. It didn't fix the problem of everyone is poor, the economy is broken, we're paying all this massive war debt. And what the politicians did was print money, and that does not work, does not fix problems, didn't work then, it also will not work today, which, don't even get me started on Bitcoin, guys. This is not the place to talk about Bitcoin, but it is a solution. Fortunately, the Weimar Germans did not have Bitcoin, so they're going through hyperinflation, there ain't no stopping it. So here we have come into one of the more interesting topics inside of Mein Kampf. Now, he talks a little bit about this man named Gottfried Feder. He was a Nazi, so it doesn't matter if we pronounce his name wrong. He doesn't deserve proper pronunciation. But he was actually one of the lecturers who brought Hitler into the party. In fact, it was his lecture on the abolition of the interest servitude that brought Hitler into the Nazi party to begin with. So who knows, maybe if it wasn't for this guy, Hitler wouldn't have become a Nazi. Maybe he would have said, screw this whole army, military, politics thing, just went off to paint. Who knows, maybe, coulda, woulda, shoulda. But he has a really interesting take on international trade. Because he believes in this conspiracy theory that not only is it poisonous and venomous and terrible for everyone, but it's all done by the Jews. And again, this ties into the whole, the Jews are responsible for all the evils of the, every bad thing, right? Right, you're walking in your backyard, you fall down, you trip, you scrape your knee. Oh, it's because of the Jews. The Jews put that rock there. I mean, this is the level of paranoia that these guys are at, right? If there is something bad, it's the Jews. If there is something good, well, it's the German people. Right? I mean, it's almost comical, but it isn't, because it was very bad. But yeah, so there's all these troubles that are going on with international trade and business and finance, and then there's always this question of national self-independence, right? And especially when Germany was blockaded during World War I by the British. I mean, that was a very terrible thing. That was a big deal. And it made a lot of people in Germany realize, hey, if we don't control all our own food, they can do that again. They can do that anytime. And it's not even just dependence on the British, but depending on sea imports at all, right? So even if you're, best friends, right? Let's say Germany is just absolute best friends with Sweden. If the UK can blockade that area and stop any, trade from going on across that sea, well, there's not really a whole lot that the Germans can do about it. And it creates a real problem for them. So one of Hitler's big points is national self-independence. And he does so because he thinks, according to, he gets these ideas from Gottfried Feder, that international stock exchange and business and all this stuff is just bad. He doesn't really lay out a good reason for it. It's just basically this evil thing. It's destroying our nation. The typical kind of outrageous stuff. They don't actually say how. Maybe one day we can actually dive into some of Feder's work, right? Maybe we can find, I'm pretty sure there's a book out there on this topic by one of these guys. Maybe we'll actually look at it, see if they actually make an argument in there. Maybe not. And, as we move on, a little bit further down here, this is actually just one of the funniest pieces because, he starts talking about this whole, the evil of international finance and stock exchange capital and, all these big buzzwords. And it's like, it's destroying our nation. We are fighting it to the death. It's like, why? He doesn't actually say why. He doesn't, he just says it's bad, right? The fools among our bourgeois politicians do not mock us on this point anymore. For even those politicians now see, if they would speak the truth, that international stock exchange capital was not only the chief instigating factor in bringing on the war, but that now when the war is over, it turns the peace into hell. So it's just like a whole bunch of claims, right? Even the enemy bourgeois politicians know. It's like, but you don't say how. You don't say why. It's like, did these bourgeois politicians really think that? I don't know. Probably not. Maybe this is probably just Hitler trying to spin a narrative here. But, it's just really interesting. I think this is kind of the danger when you have like a one-way communication channel, like a book, right? The communication is like Hitler says it and then writes it down and then you read it. And there's no room for any pushback or feedback. It's just done, right? It's out there. That's it. And when you handle things like that and you read it and it's like, oh my God, like you can go down such a rabbit hole. You can really be like, oh my God, Hitler is so right. But if you weren't careful about it, you wouldn't notice that he doesn't say how. He doesn't say why. He doesn't really give you any good details. It's just like, this is one of the eternal truths, right? Here was a truth of transcendental importance. Why? Why? It never says it, so it's just fascinating. Again, this is why going through Mein Kampf, it's just so fun. This is fun. And then he gets on down here and he says, regarding the objections raised by so-called practical people, right, here's the following answer. Now, what he's doing here is kind of sneaky, right? Because he's like, regarding the objections, which basically means that, all of anyone that is opposed to what we stand for, these so-called practical people, what these people are really saying, it can, basically be debunked. Any criticism at all, any objective that they have with our policy, debunked right here, right? This is like, have you ever seen those, the SJW pwned on YouTube clips, right? Or, SJW owned compilation, things of that nature, right? Get owned, right? As if one goofy little one-liner can debunk an entire school of thought. Right, so it's like, it's these people, they watch these SJW owned in one line clip, 45-second clip on YouTube, and it is somehow an argument against all left-wing thought ever. Right? It's like, even one of the more popular ones, like, how is communism gonna work? Like, it doesn't. Own, they got the sunglasses coming in, they got the I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about. But that is not conducive to, it doesn't help political discussion. And whenever you try to simplify or straw man, this is basically what Hitler is doing here. He's straw manning these practical people, or so-called. Are they really practical? I don't think so, says Hitler. But he calls this the abolition of the servitude resulting from interest capital. Now, the problem with Hitler's main point here is that international trade and interest capital loans, these are not weapons. These are not tools to facilitate slavery. They are things that create natural incentives for business. if you do away with interest, right, what incentive do people have to make loans? And that is the one thing that I don't think the Nazis really understood about it. Like we want to take away all interest. All right, well, why in the heck would you ever make a loan? Like, you just take away a natural incentive there. And, here's the thing about it. Debt and interest and all these different things, all these different, tools of modern finance, they are not in themselves evil. I always like to use a really simple analogy, right? So you have to imagine a farmer. Let's say we got Farmer Joe. He's trying to really make a profitable farm on his land, right? He went all in. He owns his farm. He's got his family working it, and that's great for him, right? Farmer Joe's doing good for himself, but he cannot afford the newest, greatest tractor to, do his seeds or, to help with his field, right? He just can't afford it. Doesn't have the money for it. But he knows that if he has it, he can work much more efficiently. He can get more bang for his buck out of his farm. Things will be better. And what he does is he goes down to the bank. So Farmer Joe says, listen, guys, give me a loan. Give me like $5,000. I'm going to go get me a nice tractor. And then I'm going to have a financially solvent farm over here. And that's going to be great. I'll be able to pay you guys back with interest. I'm going to have this fancy new tractor. Right, like, because he gets to keep the tractor after he pays the loan back. So that's great for him. But it also means that it just brings him closer to being economically prosperous sooner, economically solvent. And when the bank does that, that ends up being a net profit. They make a little bit of money back, right? They have an incentive to do so with the interest. And then Farmer Joe, he's now economically self-sufficient. So the loan, that interest that he paid isn't, slavery. It is not the bank enslaving him. It is a natural incentive. It helped him. That loan was not slavery. It was a tool. Farmer Joe knew full well that he was going into it. Now, of course, when we apply this analogy, because this is basically what happens with countries, when you apply it to that extent, it feels much less voluntary because in that case, Farmer Joe would be all of Germany. So when you have an entire nation that is, using some kind of a loan or borrowing, what have you, and they're paying this interest, it can feel like slavery if you were not the politician to sign on with that, to make that decision. And even if it was a bad decision, right, it's not the fault of the person giving the loan. It's not the fault of the loan itself. If you had a bad politician that did that, that's on them. And you should get them out of power. You should forget them and then undo their policies as much as possible if you can. But, the idea that loans and interest and all that is slavery, it's very dramatic, right? It all goes back to these, the ideas of making things memorable, making it really spicy, right? Because if you made a valid criticism, right? The interest is too high. The interest on these loans, too high. It's unacceptable. It is bad for economic stimulation. All these people are going to default on their loans and it's going to be bad. It's going to create an economic turmoil. It's going to be bad for everyone. You make an argument like that, that's one thing. But it's not as spicy. It doesn't work as well with the crowd. So instead of making a nuanced, decent argument like that is a little bit more connected with reality, and we can actually debate the finer points. Instead of doing that, interest is slavery, right? International trade is slavery. What? All right, if you're in Germany, especially, there are things that you cannot physically grow in Germany. They just don't have the climate for it. And when you do that, just imagine, right, tomatoes, right? There were no tomatoes in Europe up until they discovered tomatoes in the New World. And, that's just something that you it wasn't there naturally. It's hard to grow tomatoes in certain places. And I mean, it's just one of these things that international trade is generally a good thing. But tying in these crazy conspiracy theories about it's enslaving us and the Jews are behind it all, that's where you exit reality and you go into Looney Tune world. And now we have actually come to one of the funnier bits in Mein Kampf, because Hitler does a little bit of a self-own here and he doesn't even quite realize it. So he's talking about, again, he's going on about the economics and whatnot, right? Gottfried Fieder in his one lecture. And he talks about how now he's finally interested in studying the life work of the Jew, Karl Marx. Of course, he's got to point out that Marx was a Jew, despite being an anti-Semite. So Marx was ethnically Jewish, not religious. And he was, he denounced the religion. He thought the Jews were bad people because they were kind of the big capitalists. And of course, Marx is 100% opposed to capitalism. And he thinks the Jews are responsible for capitalism. So he just hates Jews, very anti-Semitic. Very ironic because it's kind of the stereotype, the self-hating Jew, right? But Hitler, he points that out, and then he's saying how his capital, Das Kapital, right, the big famous work Marx wrote, became intelligible to me now for the first time. And I don't think he quite realizes that he's saying he was not smart enough before to read Das Kapital. But don't worry, guys. I listened to this one lecture by this self-taught economist over here. Not a real economist. Self-taught economist. And now I understand all of the economics, man. Not just some of it. I understand all the economics. And I can read the enemy's works. Das Kapital. I can read what the enemies are saying. I know how to debunk what they're saying. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to debunk their stuff. I understand it though. And again, it kind of echoes a lot of the sentiment that Hitler has made throughout this entire book, where he just says that he has a good understanding of this or that, but he doesn't demonstrate it, right? He doesn't actually lay out any of the arguments in Das Kapital or what the Social Democrats were saying. They were basically as far left as you could go in Germany at that point, basically the predecessor of the Communist Party. But he doesn't actually say why. Quite a bit. So I have such a good understanding of international trade and economics and, but he does not actually show you that he does. He just kind of says he does, which I think we see how dangerous that really was, Well, all poverty and all bad stuff in the economy because of Jews. All good stuff in economy because of us Germans. More or less Hitler's stance on economics. But one of the problems that Hitler has is he takes problem with the international trade thing. And again, international trade is a tricky topic, but it's generally a rising tide that lifts all boats. When more people are participating in a free market, a genuinely free market, and there are no monopolies and people can do what they please, it's generally a good thing for the people. Not if you're the government, though. And this kind of echoes, that other point that we were discussing earlier, how the interests of the government and the people kind of diverge sometimes, where the government, they want to have that ability to give the middle finger to anyone whenever they want. That is definitely one of the things that Hitler wants when he becomes a politician. So of course he's all for economic self-sufficiency, because when you don't have to economically rely on anyone, you can say, hey, screw you. And hey, France, you stink. Your cheese is bad, right? You can do whatever you want because no one can tell you, oh, hey, you're gonna insult my cheese? Well, screw you. I'm not gonna trade with you anymore. All of a sudden, that's not a problem that people can say, right? Not, forget about the fact that it's going to make you and your country less wealthy, less well off than you otherwise would be. But, If you're the government, you're already living pretty good anyway, right? Hitler, when he controlled the Third Reich, he was living a nice life. If cutting off trade with the rest of Europe or anyone else, it's bad for the people, but I mean, who cares, right? That's their problem. But my friends, I think we're going to call it quits for this episode. I really hope you enjoyed, especially this cell phone right here. I just cannot get over that. His capital became intelligible to me for the first time. Like, what? But if you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to drop a like in the comment section. And also, if you guys want more bonus content, more access to the postscript series, a whole bunch of really interesting stuff going on over there. So if you guys want some of that, make sure to check out the Patreon page for more information. And in advance, thank you so much. If that's what you do. Don't feel like you have to. If you don't want to become a patron, that's okay, man. I still love you. I still love you. Thank you so much for watching. This has been History for Thinkers, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.